Hi, everyone. Thank you, Noel and Monty. And I want to say specifically, thank you for inviting me to share. It's an honor and a privilege. And Noel had talked about the 30-second pitch. The first time I actually attended a Creative Mornings was back in November 2019. And the theme at that time was lost. And I jumped up here on stage and I said, I'd been lost for the last 3 years, and now I was ready to come out of hiding. And now here I am on exactly the same stage. And so, hi everyone, and here I go. I'm gonna use this. I'm here to speak on identity. And identity is a huge word, defined by Merriam-Webster as the distinguishing character or personality of an individual. And I love the words distinguishing character because it suggests uniqueness. It suggests that thing that makes us different, that thing that makes us set apart. I think for most of us during our childhood, our parents encouraged us to own who we are, be yourself, accept yourself for who we are. And I think all of us can also admit that as we've grown up as adults, society has given us a slightly different message. A message that says, be yourself, but not that way. We receive the message that it's more important to fit in and not rock the boat than to be ourselves and have our voice be heard. Parents, education, religion, culture, and society have handed us an identity, and they've told us to put this on in order to be accepted. We've been conditioned to shut down, fit in, and find some shred of normalcy in embodying the smallest versions of ourselves. We hide our potential in order to avoid others feeling uncomfortable around us, and we hide behind masks because we do not believe we'll be accepted as ourselves. We've adopted a narrative of ourselves that conforms to societal expectations, and in some cases has absolutely no semblance of who we really are. But we cannot speak our truth and at the same time be held captive by the opinions of others. But the reality is that speaking our truth and openly being authentic can really come at a high price. Like Noel mentioned, my name is Angel Simone, and I'm here to share with you the cost I paid for owning who I am. I was born in Liverpool, England. However, both my parents are from the Caribbean, so when they got a divorce, my mom and I moved back to the Caribbean, and due to her job, we lived on hospital grounds 24/7. And so as a child and as a teenager growing up, I didn't have many childhood friends. And my best friend was 10 years older than me, and she was an evangelical, born-again Christian. And so in order to be accepted by her and her family, I became one too. Why not? I moved back to England after my teenage years, and I went to college in England, and there I continued to be part of the evangelical community. But the beliefs as an evangelical Christian that I needed to claim as my own had devastating implications about who I was. These beliefs implied that I was less than human, that I was not good enough, that I was unacceptable, somehow inherently broken. And so to remain as part of that community, I began to pretend to be something I was not. In order to keep their approval, I adopted a false self. I put on a mask that I thought would meet their expectations. You see, from a young age, I knew I was attracted to girls. But in this community, everything they said about same-sex attraction said it was wrong, and more to the point that something was wrong with me. And so I adopted a false identity, one that said I was straight. Now, some of you may be asking, why didn't you just walk away? Why didn't you just leave? To be completely honest, I didn't think I could. I didn't think I should, because wouldn't that mean walking away from God? It was easier for me to accept that there was something wrong with me than to make a choice that looked like I was walking away from God. So I actually never thought of looking beyond the church or asking questions. And by then I'd also learned that asking questions is a sin. And so I stayed. After college, I moved to Massachusetts, and by then I had accepted the ideology that change was possible, that if I believed God hard enough and fasted and prayed long enough, that He would make me straight. So that's what I did. However, 3 years after moving to Massachusetts, I suffered 4 spontaneous lung collapses in 1 year. And the doctors had absolutely no idea why it was happening. And I assumed God was punishing me. And so I tried even harder to be straight. I went to church as often as possible. I went through gay conversion therapy. I read book after book after book on how gays were healed and became straight. I stopped expressing emotion completely in the event that it might just slip out. I didn't dare hug anybody just in case they sensed it. And I stopped allowing myself to feel completely, because feeling just reminded me of the person that I didn't want to be. Sociologist Anthony Giddens states, the capacity to keep a particular narrative going is what gives us an identity. In this respect, the narrative we hold in our mind, who we tell ourselves we are, is extremely important. Our narratives become ultra important when we stop being ourselves. Perhaps we start believing the narrative others have assigned to us. Perhaps we start telling ourselves a false narrative. Whatever the case, we are not directing our own screenplay. When there is a mismatch between who we are and the mask we wear, it is called identity whiplash. The real tragedy happens when someone wears the mask for so long that they lose touch with who they really are. 5 years of being in the church in Massachusetts, and I started getting prophecies, messages from God, people would share. And I'm sure a lot of you may be able to guess what the theme of these messages were. They were, you need to get married and have kids. For some of you, that would have been the point that you hightailed it out of there. But for me, it was an opportunity to prove to God how serious I was. For me, I believed God hated me. And so this was my opportunity to prove to Him that I was worthy of His love. So 3 years later, I'm married to an amazing guy. And for those wondering, yes, intimacy was a huge challenge. I would psych myself up for days and weeks saying, gotta be intimate, gotta be intimate. Remember, God wants you to have kids, and something has to happen for those kids to come out. So that was an interesting challenge to have to walk. But my daughter was born 2 years later after our marriage, and then 3 years later, in 2009, I was laid off during the recession. I had a position in IT, and I could not find a job. And so the church offered me a part-time job while I was looking for a job. I ended up working at the church full-time. My son was born 2 years after that. This is exactly what God wants, right? I'm now working in the church as an administrative director. I'm a staff pastor. I'm a worship leader. I lead women's conferences. I run small groups. I counsel church members. I am where exactly God wants me to be, surely. I'm entrenched in church life. My husband and my kids are there. All my friends are there. And everything I am is in the church. Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is a writer from the 19th century, says, no man for any considerable period of time can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be true. On the outside, I'm this strong, powerful Christian. And on the inside, I'm unable to feel or express emotion. I'm ashamed of who and what I am. There are many times I couldn't even hug my kids because I couldn't bear the idea of being touched. I buried who I was as deeply as possible. I couldn't feel anything: joy, happiness, love, sadness, grief. To me, feeling was just a reminder of the very thing I was trying to hide. I think it's widely accepted that we all wear masks to varying degrees, that we all present a false self. But what is wildly often overlooked is the cost of doing so. I was paying a high price in terms of my well-being and my relationships. I couldn't even accept any compliments as a pastor because that success was owed to a person I was pretending to be and not my true self. Richard Rohr, who's a spiritual writer, says there's much evidence on several levels that there are at least two major tasks in human life. The first task is to build a strong container. The second is to find the contents that that container was meant to hold. Well, in 2015, 11 years of being married would be the year that my container would begin to crack. Several events happened that caused me to begin to question the way God saw my sexuality. The biggest one was when Alan Chambers, the then president of Exodus International, the gay conversion ministry I was associated with, publicly apologized to the LGBT+ community for the pain and hurt Exodus had caused, and announced that the ministry was permanently shutting down. Exodus published a letter that included statements from the leaders such as, "I never saw one of our members or leaders become heterosexual, so deep down I knew that it wasn't true. And I do not believe that reparative therapy changes sexual orientation. In fact, it does a great many harm to many people." My world began to shake around me. It was devastating. I felt trapped by the identity I had assumed, by the lie I was living, and by the marriage I was in. My ability to keep wearing the mask was beginning to crumble. And by the end of 2015, I knew I could not keep on going. But I was so scared. To admit that it might be okay to be me meant that every single area of my life was about to unravel. The false identity I adopted was not just with my career or just with my kids or just with my family. It was across the board. It was across all aspects of my life. So I decided to share what was going on with my husband. And that's a whole separate story about how that conversation went down. But we'll just say we had no idea what we were going to do about us, but he insisted that I not tell the pastors. However, I wasn't sure that I could continue working at the church and being part of the leadership team with this amount of turmoil happening. So I started looking for a job. Then in February 2016, I'm in a meeting with another pastor who's not affiliated with our church, with that church at all. And out of the blue, he talks about he has a prayer leader that's just come out gay, and the leaders of the church want that prayer leader to step down. And this pastor says no. And he just shares randomly, as a Gordon Cornwall graduate, that he studied the Bible for the last 10 years, and he believes that it's not clear where the Bible stands on homosexuality because of the multiple interpretations, context, history, etc. And I'm sitting there listening to him, and the fact that another pastor, another Christian, is saying something so completely different to the church that I was in, I was in shock. And so I shared with him where I was at, what was going on with me, and he encouraged me, I think just sensing the level of turmoil within me, he encouraged me to be honest with my pastors. So went back, and my husband Still didn't agree, as he was concerned I'd lose my job. Continued job hunting, but I could not focus hard enough, and I could not find a job because everything else was consuming me. What do I do? Do I say anything? There's no one forcing me to say anything, but I was losing my sleep. I was losing myself. Sleep evaded me. I could not decide. I had two choices: continue wearing the mask and lose myself, or take the mask off and lose everything. So this is early 2016, and we are heading into Easter. And the pastor chooses a title, a series for all of us to speak on, and he gives out a title. Have you ever had this moment in time when you feel the universe is banging on your door to wake up, and it's just going to continue banging until you open that door? Well, get this. I get given a message to speak, and the title of this message is "The Jesus Who Calls You to Stop Playing It Safe." The tagline of the message is, "The price of playing it safe limits our impact, shrinks our faith, stunts our growth, and shrivels our hearts." I'm like, really? Really? And I can't say no to sharing this message. So at the end of February, I spoke a message. I preached my heart out, to be exact, encouraging the community to embrace risk and uncertainty, and telling them that God loves them and there's nothing too big or too great that God's love cannot overcome, and we should all get together and walk on water and step out. And I did a really good job. But inside, I was dying 1,000 deaths. I felt like the biggest hypocrite in that church. And I couldn't take it anymore. And so early March, I sat down with one of my pastors, and I think I only got out one sentence. All I said was, "I do not believe homosexuality is a sin." After 19 years of playing an integral role in this church, I was about to pay a really high price for taking off my mask. See, we love to throw around the words vulnerability and authenticity. They're awesome buzzwords, but let's not underestimate the cost. They cost a huge amount of strength and courage. The courage to be seen, the strength to stand alone, and the resolve to withstand rejection. I was immediately asked to step down as a pastor. The pastors outed me to the leadership team. They ordered books all along the themes of love the sinner, hate the sin. They shipped it out to all their leaders. They shipped it out to every pastor in their network. They demanded that my husband and I go to marriage counseling in Colorado to see a sex therapist. I was devastated. I felt so deeply betrayed. I had to leave my kids for 4 nights with someone. I'd never left my kids anywhere before, but I had to leave them with somebody from the church. And I knew they expected me to come back from Colorado straight. When I got to Colorado, the first thing they did was perform a mental health assessment. And I was diagnosed with anhedonia and dysthenia. I had never heard of anhedonia before, and so I had to look it up. And it actually means the inability to feel pleasure. Yeah, that's about the size of it. And dysthenia, which I think a lot of us are familiar with, is low-level depression. I did not return straight. The fear of my influence on the congregation motivated everything they did from that day on. They treated me like a cancer that needed to be isolated and cut out. I was indeed an abomination in their eyes. Most of my friends stopped speaking to me. I would receive emails about what a failure I am and the betrayal that I am enforcing on the church, that I was possessed by the devil, and that I needed to come into the fold of the church and be delivered and go through exorcism, etc. And they put me out there as a demon-possessed person. By the end of April 2016, I had lost my job. And they offered me severance over a period of 3 months, and that was only on the condition that I wouldn't tell anybody what happened. They wrote a statement about my moral failure on my behalf, and they shared it with the congregation on a Sunday morning while my husband was in the audience. My husband continued attending the church, and the pressure of that and being asked to leave just put a lot of pressure on the marriage. And so by August, we had made the decision to get a divorce. But I want to say, the time between April, when I was asked to leave the church, and August, when we got the divorce, was the most painful and loneliest time of my life. And the pastor who had suggested that I share where I was, he offered me the opportunity to counsel with one of his staff pastors. And I think I called her every week, if not multiple times a week. And there's one thing she said to me that to this day I will tell you it saved my life. And she said I needed to learn to separate the voice of God from the voice of the church. The fact that those two voices could be different never occurred to me. I lived assuming that pastors spoke on behalf of God. So if they said I was not human, surely that's how God saw me. August 31st, 2016 would have been my 12th anniversary. But instead, I'm dealing with the truth that by wearing a mask, I had given away my power, I had given away my voice, I'd given away my value, and my self-worth was found only in the opinion of others. And by taking that mask off, I was worthless. I was nothing. I had lost everything. Family, job, we had to sell the house. Everything was gone. My whole life, I had tried to be something that I was not. Trying to be normal, or at minimum, acceptable. I became skilled at so many things just so I would have value in the eyes of others. I tried to fit in. But it's one thing when a community rejects you. It is something very different when you are told repeatedly that God hates you, that God sees you as something to be cast aside. One of the parting sentences when I left the church was, God may love you, but you will split hell wide open. I hated myself for who I am, because who I am had caused me so much pain. I believe most of the LGBT plus community don't grow up as themselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. Most of our adult years is spent unpacking which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we created to protect us. I've spent the last 3 years unpacking the shame I had of being gay. I've had to release the regret of wearing a mask and living a lie for so long. I've had to forgive myself for not leaving earlier, for not knowing that I had a choice, for being so naive, so gullible. The question I kept asking myself over and over and over again was, how could you have been so stupid to trust their words above the words of anybody else? I've experienced healing by trading the anger I had with the church and its pastors for forgiveness and compassion. And that wasn't easy. There were times I hated the church so much, and I even hated God, and just people would show up in my life and they would just drop little nuggets of wisdom that helped me through the process of handing over anger and taking up forgiveness and compassion. I had to accept that the voice of God was different from this church. And the process of receiving God's love and believing that I was worthy of his love was a huge battle. Shame fought me all the way to the top. I've spent 3 years alone with no other voice to guide me because it was other voices that I had allowed to define me for so long. It has taken these years to genuinely believe that I am loved just as I am, that I'm worthy of that love. My identity is no longer found in the opinion or the acceptance of others. I have laid down the mask. Brené Brown states that when we can let go of what other people think and own our story, we gain access to our worthiness. The feeling that we are enough just as we are, and that we are worthy of love and belonging. When we spend a lifetime trying to distance ourselves from the parts of our lives that don't fit who we think we're supposed to be, we stand outside of our story and we hustle for worthiness by constantly performing, perfecting, pleasing, and proving. Our sense of worthiness, that critically important piece that gives us access to love and belonging, lives inside of our story. So, what's your story? What will be said about you and about whether or not you chose to be different, to risk rejection or failure or ridicule in order to express all of who you are? If you are to be a pioneer in anything, you must be willing to walk alone at times. If you're going to be an authentic version of yourself, it requires that you walk a path no one has walked before, because that path belongs to you. One of my favorite quotes is by Marianne Williamson, and I won't read the whole thing here, but it says, we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. I want to encourage you, as scary as it may be, do not trade authenticity for approval. Do not trade your creativity for conformity or your fabulousness for fitting in. I'm going to end with a quote by Jack Canfield, and it says, I think the greatest wound we've all experienced is somehow being rejected for being our authentic self. And as a result of that, we then try to be what we're not, to get approval and love, protection, safety, money, whatever. And the real need for all of us is to reconnect with the essence of who we really are and re-own all the disowned parts of ourselves. We all go around hiding parts of ourselves. I was with a Buddhist teacher a number of years ago, and he said, let me give you the secret to life. If you were to meditate for 20 years this is where you'd finally get to. Be yourself, but be all of you. Thank you.